The city was alive with the hum of traffic, neon lights flickering on wet pavement as the evening settled in. Sylvester Stallone walked down the street, his hands tucked into the pockets of his leather jacket. Despite his years in the spotlight, he preferred moments like these, just him, the city, and the echoes of his own thoughts. As he passed by a small cafe with rainbow flags hanging in the window, his eyes locked onto a young man sitting outside, sipping an iced coffee. The kid had bright pink hair, a nose piercing, and oversized clothes that barely fit his skinny frame. His phone was covered in stickers, most of them with slogans about love, equality, and self-expression. Man, Stallone muttered under his breath. He wasn't one to judge, but something about the kid reminded him of how different the world had become. The young man, noticing the look, raised an eyebrow. "You got a problem?" he asked, his voice carrying a mix of defiance and insecurity. Stallone smirked. "Nah, just thinking." "You ever hit the gym, kid?" The young man scoffed. No? Why?" Stallone chuckled. "Figures. You got a name?" "Jacob," the kid said. "And for the record, I'm fine just the way I am." Stallone leaned on the railing, looking at Jacob with curiosity. "Let me ask you something. If you had to protect someone you really cared about, you think you could do it?" Jacob blinked. "What? I mean, violence isn't the answer." "Maybe not," Stallone nodded. "But strength? Strength is always an answer." Jacob rolled his eyes, taking another sip of his drink. "You sound like my uncle. He's always telling me to man up and all that crap. I don't need to prove anything to anyone." Stallone studied him for a moment. "I ain't your uncle, kid. But let me tell you something. Life ain't all about proving. Sometimes it's about being ready." Jacob scoffed. "For what? A street fight?" "For life," Stallone said. "Look, I don't care what you believe in, what you stand for. But I do care about wasted potential. And you? You got a lot of it." Jacob laughed. "Oh yeah? And what, you're going to train me? Turn me into some muscle-bound action hero?" Stallone shrugged. "Not unless you got the guts for it." For a moment, Jacob hesitated. Something about the old man's presence made him feel challenged. He hated that. But a small part of him was curious. "Fine," Jacob said, standing up. "One day, just to prove you wrong." Stallone smirked. "We'll see about that, kid." Jacob regretted his decision almost immediately. Stallone's gym wasn't some luxury fitness center with smoothie bars and air conditioning. It was old school, grimy brick walls, the smell of sweat and iron in the air, punching bags covered in worn-out duct tape. A place built for people who weren't afraid of pain. Jacob stood in the center, arms crossed, wearing a loose hoodie and joggers. His pink hair was tied back in a messy bun. "So, what's first?" he asked, trying to sound unimpressed. Stallone tossed him a heavy jump rope. "Start with this." Jacob stared at it. "You want me to jump rope?" Stallone leaned against a punching bag. "Yeah, fast." Jacob sighed and started jumping. Within 30 seconds, he was gasping for air. His legs felt like lead, and sweat dripped down his forehead. Stallone checked his watch. "Damn. Thought you'd last at least a minute." Jacob threw the rope down. "This is stupid." "You agreed to train," Stallone reminded him. "And right now you're giving me excuses instead of effort." Jacob wiped his face with his sleeve. "This isn't for me, man. I'm not built for this whole tough guy thing." Stallone walked over, his expression serious. "Kid, listen. Strength ain't about being tough. It's about having control over your body, over your mind. Right now, you don't got either." Jacob clenched his jaw. He wanted to argue, but deep down, he knew Stallone was right. Stallone sighed. "Tell you what. Let's make it interesting. You last through today's workout, and you get to walk out of here with some respect. Quit now, and you prove every person right who ever said you couldn't do something hard." Jacob hated losing. even if it was just as some washed-up action star. He grabbed the jump rope again. Fine. Let's go. Jacob lay flat on the gym floor, drenched in sweat. Every muscle in his body screamed. You alive? Stallone asked, taking a sip of water. Jacob groaned. Barely. Stallone laughed. Good. That means you actually worked. Jacob rolled onto his side. I don't get it. You could train anyone. Why me? Stallone leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Because you remind me of someone. Jacob raised an eyebrow. Who? Stallone smirked. Me. A long time ago. Jacob scoffed. Yeah, right. Believe what you want, Stallone said, grabbing his gym bag. But I'll see you tomorrow. Unless you're quit and... Jacob hesitated. Every part of him wanted to walk away. This wasn't his world. He wasn't like Stallone, or the guys lifting weights in the corner, or the fighters throwing punches at the heavy bags. But something about today felt different. Jacob sat up, his muscles aching. Same time. Stallone smiled. Same time. Jacob exhaled. What the hell had he gotten himself into? The next morning, Jacob woke up feeling like he'd been hit by a truck. His legs refused to move. His arms ached. Even his fingers hurt, which made no sense. He groaned, rolling onto his side. What the hell am I doing? He grabbed his phone, half expecting a text from Stallone saying the whole thing was a joke. But there was nothing. Just a clock blinking 6:12 a.m. His brain screamed at him to stay in bed. But another part of him, the part that hated being underestimated, forced him up. By 7 a.m., Jacob stood outside the gym, a coffee in one hand, his other stuffed in his hoodie pocket. He watched as Stallone arrived on a beat-up old bike, dressed in a gray sweatshirt and sweatpants. Jacob smirked. A bike? Really? Stallone shrugged. Cardio. Jacob took a sip of coffee. So what's the plan today? More jump rope? Maybe some extreme push-ups. Stallone unlocked the gym doors. Nah. Today, we see what you're made of. Jacob stood in front of a long, narrow alleyway behind the gym, lined with cracked pavement and rusted fire escapes. This, he asked, raising an eyebrow. Stallone nodded. You're going to sprint from here to the other side. 10 times. No breaks. Jacob laughed. Dude, I can barely walk. Stallone crossed his arms. You got 2 choices. Push through or walk away. Up to you. Jacob scowled. You really know how to make things sound dramatic, huh? Stallone didn't respond. Jacob sighed. Fine. He took a deep breath and took off running. By the 5th sprint, Jacob felt like his lungs were on fire. By the 7th, he wanted to throw up. By the 9th, his legs felt like jelly. And by the 10th, he collapsed onto the pavement, gasping for air. Stallone walked over, tossing him a bottle of water. Not bad. Jacob looked up, barely able to lift his arm. Not bad? That was insane. Stallone crouched beside him. You think this is just about running? Lifting weights? Nah, kid. This is about discipline. Pushing yourself even when you don't wanna. Especially when you don't wanna. Jacob took a sip of water. I get it. Pain is just weakness leaving the body, or whatever motivational crap you're about to say. Stallone chuckled. Nah, pain is pain. The question is, what do you do with it? Jacob didn't have an answer for that. Yet. 3 weeks later, Jacob wasn't the same person. His soft, lanky frame had started to harden. His posture had changed. His endurance had grown. But more than that, his mindset was different. He didn't roll his eyes when things got tough. He didn't make excuses. He pushed through. And Stallone saw it. One evening, after an intense training session, Jacob stood in front of the mirror, staring at himself. His pink hair was damp with sweat, his arms more defined, his hoodie hanging looser than before. Stallone leaned against the doorway. Seeing something new? Jacob exhaled. I don't know. It's weird. I used to feel like I had everything figured out. Now, it's like I don't even know who I was before this. Stallone smirked. That's 'cause you're becoming someone else. Jacob ran a hand through his hair. Yeah, but do I even like this guy? Stallone shrugged. That's for you to decide. Silence. Then Jacob turned. So what's next? Stallone's smirk widened. Tomorrow we fight. Jacob stood in the center of the boxing ring, his heart pounding like a war drum. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting sharp shadows on the sweat-stained mat. His hands, wrapped in fresh white tape, felt clammy inside the borrowed gloves. Across from him, a man in his mid-30s rolled his shoulders, smirking. He had a shaved head, a thick neck, and fists like bricks. This guy's gonna kill me, Jacob muttered under his breath. Stallone, standing outside the ring, folded his arms. You ain't here to win, kid. You're here to learn. Jacob licked his dry lips. Yeah? Learn what? How to get knocked out in under a minute. Stallone chuckled. That depends on you. The bell rang. Jacob barely had time to blink before his opponent lunged. The first punch landed square on Jacob's ribs. A white-hot pain exploded through his side, knocking the air from his lungs. He stumbled back, gasping, his arms flailing in a weak attempt to guard himself. The second punch cracked against his jaw. Stars. Pain. A sharp ringing in his ears. He hit the mat hard. Stallone didn't move. Get up. Jacob groaned, tasting blood in his mouth. I think my soul just left my body. Get up. Jacob forced himself onto his hands and knees. His vision swam. His whole body screamed for him to stay down. His opponent smirked. Kid's got no fight in him. Something about that lit a fire inside Jacob's chest. No fight? Screw that. Jacob pushed himself to his feet. His legs wobbled. His breathing was ragged. But he raised his fists. His opponent's smirk faded. Good, Stallone muttered. The fight continued. This time, Jacob didn't just stand there. He moved. He dodged. He blocked. He fought back. His punches weren't strong. His form was sloppy. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't running from a challenge. When the bell rang, Jacob collapsed onto the ropes, drenched in sweat. His opponent, still standing, gave him a nod. Not bad, kid. Jacob wiped the blood from his lip. Not bad? I just got my ass kicked. Stallone climbed into the ring. Yeah, and you got back up. Jacob exhaled. His ribs ached. His jaw throbbed, but deep down he felt something new. Pride. Over the next few months, Jacob trained harder than ever. The gym became his second home. His body grew stronger, leaner. His mind sharper. But Stallone wasn't just teaching him how to fight. He was teaching him how to face the world. You ain't training just for the ring, kid, Stallone said one night, as they sat outside the gym, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Jacob took a sip from his water bottle. Yeah? Then what am I training for? Stallone looked at him. For life. For when things get hard. For when people doubt you. Strength ain't just about muscle. It's about who you are when things go south. Jacob was silent for a moment. Then he sighed. You ever think, maybe I was fine the way I was? Stallone smiled. Maybe, but you wouldn't be here if you really believed that. Jacob chuckled. Guess not. Stallone patted his shoulder. Come on, kid. We got work to do. And for the first time in his life, Jacob was ready. Months had passed. Jacob stood in front of the mirror in the gym's locker room, staring at the man he had become. His body was stronger, his arms and shoulders more defined. His posture, once slouched and careless, was now firm and confident. His pink hair was still there, but it no longer looked out of place. He no longer looked like a kid trying to stand out, because now he knew who he was. And tonight, he was going to prove it. A small crowd had gathered at the gym for the final challenge. A real underground fight. This wasn't just sparring. It wasn't training. This was Jacob's test. His opponent? The same man who had knocked him down on his first day. The same guy who once called him weak. Jacob stepped into the ring. The lights were harsh, the air thick with sweat and tension. He wasn't afraid. The bell rang. The fight began. Pain, power, and purpose. The first few punches hurt. They always did. But Jacob didn't stumble. He dodged. He countered. He struck back. His opponent threw a hard right hook. Jacob blocked it effortlessly and landed a sharp jab to the ribs. The crowd murmured. This wasn't the same Jacob they had seen months ago. His opponent came at him harder. Jacob took the hits, but he never went down. He absorbed the pain, controlled his breathing, fought smarter. Then his opening. Jacob threw a right cross, hard, clean, perfect. It connected. His opponent staggered. For the first time, he looked unsure. Jacob didn't hesitate. He stepped in, fought with everything he had, and after one final, powerful strike, his opponent hit the mat. Silence. Then the bell. Jacob had won. The man in the mirror. Stallone didn't say anything at first. He just watched as Jacob sat on the edge of the ring, wiping sweat from his forehead. Then finally he spoke. You proved it. Jacob let out a breathless laugh. Proved what? Stallone smirked. That you ain't the same kid who walked in here. Jacob looked down at his hands, the hands of a fighter. He had come here looking for something. For strength. For discipline. For himself. And now, he had found it. A few weeks later, Jacob sat across from a news reporter at a small table in a downtown cafe. The interviewer smiled, adjusting her microphone. So, Jacob, your transformation has gone viral. People are calling you an inspiration. What do you think about all of it? Jacob sipped his coffee, smirking. I think people love a good underdog story. She laughed. Fair enough. But tell me, what's the biggest thing you've learned? Jacob thought for a moment. He looked past her, out the window, where the city buzzed with life. Then, he leaned forward. That strength isn't about muscles. It's about knowing who you are and refusing to break. The reporter nodded. And Stallone? What was he like as a mentor? Jacob smiled. He didn't change me. He just made me see the man I was meant to be.